Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest I think you're really going to enjoy. So, joining me today to break down an insane article from the left is the Prudentialist. Thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks for having me on again. It's always a pleasure, Auron.
Yeah, he's suit mogging me again. If you're listening to the podcast and you don't understand, Prudentialist has once again brought his suit game. He did, however, do me the favor of not bringing the tie.
It's
So
Casual Friday.
yeah, I appreciate you letting me off with just a little bit there, a little bit of a hip check, not the full bodied blow there. But he is absolutely there. Of course, I will be in a suit along with Prudentialist over at the Skildings conference here next week. I believe tickets are still on sale, but they're running out pretty quickly, right?
Yep. So stillings.com/events if you still want to see Auron and I talk.
Yep. We'll be going on. I will be explaining why the woke cannot be put away. And so if you want to enjoy that talk, you can definitely check out, get some tickets, join us in Tennessee. All right. So, what are we doing here today? As you might have checked on the stream title there, we're looking at a article from The Nation, which is, of course, a ridiculous left-wing rag, but this one kind of told some kind of mask off moments here. It was a little too clear about kind of the left's purpose, their drive, what they're actually trying to do. So I thought it'd be interesting if the Prudentialists and I kind of read it together and talked about what was going on here. So we'll just jump right into it here. America's suburbs are breeding grounds for fascism. Hate against trans people is rising, but the suburbs are what gives this hate its fervor and popularity. So, of course, ridiculous on its face, but you have to respect this from the left. Everything is an opportunity to destroy structures that oppose them, right? Everything is an opportunity to take what seems like a mild disagreement and turn it into a destruction of those who might oppose you and the things that they kind of rely on to get by through the day. And so that's what they kind of turn this into here. Of course, you can see this great. I gotta say, this piece of art is particularly great. It's just all of these people like running away from what looks like an exploding like terrorist attack on a rainbow Target store here. That's kind of an amazing snapshot.
I mean, it's lovely projection considering all the bomb threats against Target have been by progressives. But I kind of would, I guess, maybe push back on the mild disagreement part, because what might seem like a mild disagreement between like someone on the right and to someone on the left, for them, all these disagreements are existential. So I wouldn't say that, for us, it's a mild disagreement, but for them, if you want to criminalize pedophilia, for example, right, all of a sudden they're going to come out of the woodwork and tell you that this is against trans rights or something, and then more questions start getting raised, and then when you ask those questions, right, that's when they'll put out the article that deracinating Suburbia is actually the real breeding ground for fascism, and here we are.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to communicate there is that for us this just seems like a mild disagreement, but I respect the left because they take this to exactly to the quick. Like you're saying, at this point they'll just say the quiet part out loud. What do you mean? Trying to ban this stuff is directly anti-LGBTQ. Well, what does that mean? Okay. Let's look at why that's an existential threat to that culture. But yeah, all right. So let's jump in here. The first paragraph just kind of sets the scene. The target closest to where I sit is in the Torrington, Connecticut. It's next to a Home Depot, a Wendy's, a Walgreens, a Walmart, and a Chipotle. Of course, all symbols of the Nazi Party, well-known kind of conveyors of radical right-wing ideology. Driving is the only option here, unless you're willing to take the one available bus from downtown and then walk along one or two large highways that bisect the area. If you drive down a few miles of road without or roads without sidewalks appear, on which sit houses for sale, 4 bedrooms, new construction, 2-car garages, and gray exteriors. So if we're not all packed into kind of giant high-rise buildings, going to our local bodega, then we're just living in pretty much a nightmare, right, Prudentialist?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's plenty of things to complain about Suburbia, but we have to paint the scene so we can tell you that those awful people that don't want to live in the city are it's not your walkable cities, everyone. It's suburbs. You know that you're in fascist country now.
So someone said the Subreich is rising, which is that's good. That's a good joke. So and I want to be clear here, guys. So there are like legitimate points about the problem of suburbs and how they create certain amounts of kind of atomization and deracination. There are fair moments of kind of critique about some of these forms of city planning. But we'll see that is not like the interest here is not in creating a more healthy and organic kind of way of social formation. The interest here is destroying your enemies, destroying your political enemies, and that's going to be kind of the core here. So we're not saying that suburbs are like the ultimate and best possible way to organize a city. There are legitimate points to be made against certain aspects of that, but you'll see very quickly that that's not what's happening here. Places like this are the most common form of American life. As of 2017, 52% of Americans live in suburbs. There are, of course, differences between, say, a suburb in Connecticut and a suburb in Texas, but they're all variations on a formula. And lives lived in this suburban areas tend to revolve around the same kind of places and the same kind of ideology. Again, kind of got to give the left credit here. They're willing to look at kind of structural issues in a way that much of the right is not. They know what they hate and they know what protects it or what allows it to flourish. And so their point is that the very existence of this type of housing kind of confounds the leftist project, allows people who disagree with the leftist project to live in a particular way that allows the perpetuation of their values. And this is a very serious problem.
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of reminds me of what Nick Land would say in like the Dark Enlightenment. That exit is the ultimate form of escape, and then for the left, they don't want you to have exit. So if the suburbs are an exit from urban crime and the various issues of governance, taxation, poor living standards, you can't walk anywhere without getting mugged, then yeah, they that's an exit to them, and they need to close it off somehow. So how do we close it off? Well, we associate them with Nazism, and Nazis are the only acceptable target for today. So that's what we got to do. Mask off time.
Yep, always got to be somebody we can punch. Always got to be, the left is always and everywhere normalizing the idea of acceptable political and state violence against its opponents. That's what this article is. Make no mistake. And yeah, it's that's another really good point. Is of course a lot of these suburbs are grow out of a need to escape certain aspects of leftist policy in cities, and so the whole point is again to cut off any opportunity even if it arose directly from reactions to leftist policies, for anyone to escape this, to live any kind of life that isn't completely consumed and ruled by kind of these progressive ideologies. And so it makes sense that these are now places where fascism grows. Quite the whiplash there. I see you have Walmarts and roads without sidewalks. Must be fascism. That's all it can be. The only answer. The suburbs were invented as reactionary tools against the women's liberation and civil rights movements. That's a very interesting thing to say about the civil rights movement and the women's liberation movement. Both of them make it impossible to have suburbs. Probably something that the right should think about there. The U.S. government, in concert with banks, landowners, and home builders, created a way to try and stop all that by separating people into single homes, moving public spaces, and ensuring that every neighborhood was segregated via redlining. So here's a really interesting contradiction that I want to stop and talk about for just a second here, Prudentialist. Would you say that the U.S. government has been working actively against women's liberation and civil rights? Is that been the stance of the U.S. government for the last 40 some odd years?
No, I mean, this is the Howard Zinn's baby's first understanding of progressive U.S. history. Really, if anything, what it has been for people escaping to the suburbs, or what often gets pejoratively labeled as white flight, is people trying to escape the concert and balance of this coordinated effort between government, banks, and media to ensure that you can't escape. integration, you can't escape the all-consuming aspects of the Civil Rights Act or women's liberation. I mean, there's a great tweet, and I wish I knew who said it, where he had said that really at this point, for a lot of Americans that oppose the left, your whole goal in life is this rat race to being able to have enough money in order to escape the consequences of the Civil Rights Act. And I think that you definitely see this here, where it's like, oh, these people have escaped this progressive hellhole that we've invented in cities like Detroit or Los Angeles or New York City. So clearly we have to crush these fascists that escaped the woodworks.
It's just funny that they've kind of backwards engineered the story, where the U.S. government was like really opposed to all these movements, instead of, actively structuring kind of the society around them and making them integral to kind of every aspect of kind of our larger massified government. And so I understand that they still have to play the victim here, that they still, but it's just funny to me that they can't even keep like a basic historical narrative of this together. Like, they would still, I'm sure, say that like this is something that is ongoing with banks, even though BlackRock and Merrill Lynch and all these people like 100% agree with them on everything.
I mean, Wells Fargo literally had changed their philanthropy goals from like education, healthcare, to more explicitly housing for low-income individuals and minorities. So no, I mean, this is the funny thing. Like, if the U.S. government was really in concert with like maintaining this aura of white supremacy or fascism or whatever, right? Like, I'd imagine that Eisenhower and Kennedy and LBJ would be siding with Governor Wallace. We wouldn't have the National Guard federalized with bayonets telling people to do whatever they need to do to force integration. But no, what's really important with this is that if they had only one strict dogma for how their historical narrative applied, it would make a lot of common conservative critiques of like, well, that's hypocrisy or that's a contradiction, that doesn't make sense. That would work a lot more effectively. But by having the sort of ability to be amorphous with your history, with your political narratives, it allows you to always be on the back foot in order to change your position and shift. So, in this instance, we're witnessing the article, say that the US government was the big bad evil guy, which allows them to stay in that motion of perpetual revolution, despite the fact that really the last 70 years of US history has been a leftist form of narrative, a leftist government working to achieve leftist ends, not by the will of the people or the consent of the governed as the founders would have wanted, but by judicial and executive fiat, regardless of public opinion. But having that amorphous political, historical narrative allows them at any time to sort of dodge critiques of hypocrisy or contradiction.
Yeah, I found this very interesting because I taught history, right? And it is really important for people now to never learn history chronologically. If you sit down in a current history environment, people learn McNuggets of history. They never learn actual sequences of history, which is very interesting because that allows people to kind of, basically what happens is you get told moral narratives in the guise of historical events, but you can't place them in any context. So you have no understanding of like what came before or what came after, or how one thing led to another. All you have is like, well, someone had to sit on the wrong seat of the bus, or something like this. And you just pull that out and you say, well, this is bad, and we know this is bad now. And then you just put it back into history, and you never really think about any of these things being connected to each other. And so that's a very useful tool. Of course, we all know the Orwellian quote is now just trampled to death, but the control of the past really does matter, because especially not just the events of the past, but the way people are allowed to think about the past, because you can kind of completely remove pattern recognition or consequential, you can remove any of those actual attachments, causal attachments from different events, and you can just treat each event as a way to kind of reinforce your ideology. You take it out, you put it back. It only teaches you the lesson it's supposed to, but you never. It's like how a lot of people do with the Bible, right? They just grab random verses that currently agree with the thing that they're trying to teach you, but those verses are never placed in any kind of wider context or understanding of Scripture, where you can get a more holistic understanding of kind of how this thing hangs together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like that, like you said, the Orwell quote's trampled to death, and it's like what Steve Saylor said, that political correctness, or I guess in this instance, wokeness or leftism, is just a war on pattern recognition.
Right. All right, so and so it makes sense that these are now the we already did the fascists here. Where did we stop?
Explicit goals of the designers.
I've completely lost it. Oh, we didn't do this part here.
Oh, okay.
The suburbs would keep white women at home, God forbid, and would keep white men at work to afford the home. These were explicit goals of the designers. No man who owns his house and lot can be communist. And the creator of Levittown, the model suburb, said he has too much to do. So interestingly, the left is. You'll notice the phrasing here: keep white women at home. So large corporations love that women aren't at home, right? That's a huge boon to them. So they're saying that these people who created the suburbs, these bankers, these evil capitalists, they wanted to keep women at home. But that makes no sense. Like evil capitalists who want to make as much money as possible and pay the smallest amount for labor possible want women at work because it creates cheaper labor for them. It creates a workforce that is more likely not to have a high level of conflict. And it also creates additional demand for services because now all of the things that once fell under kind of the traditional role of work for women at home suddenly becomes something you can hire someone to do, or you can create a machine to do, or you can get a subscription service for. These are all economic opportunities that are created for capitalism by women working. But these people who are trying to attack bankers, trying to attack capitalists, trying to attack this stuff, say that actually all of these evil people who care about nothing more than money are doing this thing that would make sure that they didn't make more money.
Yeah, I mean the left kind of, again, contradictions is what allows the left to springboard and dodge any sort of major criticism and critique. But I mean, it does illustrate, I think, a big part of what the left really is that you hear that phrase quite often that the woke are more correct than the mainstream. I mean, the woke are more in love with capital than the right is in a lot of respects. They're more hyper capitalist than anyone else because the things that move their march of progress are things that ordinary people don't actually want. But when you have the ability to cancel bank accounts, change things by managerial or bureaucratic fiat, whether that be in banks or within the executive branch of government, then yeah, you're going to work hand in hand with it. It's many people will tell you that anytime you hear like a leftist complaint, like, yeah, I'm punk, I'm against all these things, I'm pro trans rights or whatever, and it's just like, so you're on the same side as BlackRock, the U.S. government, Wells Fargo, all these other large major banks and institutions. They're more in bed with capital than the right is.
Yeah, it's certainly a situation where again, like we said, once you can just pull these different aspects of history, you can just ignore any kind of actual connections or any kind of real context. Then you get to form this narrative where you remain the victim, even though it's very clear that you are aligned with many of these institutions.
I mean, that creator of Levittown does have a very good point, though. Like, if you own private property and have a job,
Yeah.
you're not going to be a communist. Like,
Right.
all this communal housing, all these public works projects, all this, like, little renting America. I mean, if you don't own anything, right, like, there's no skin in the game. Of course, I'm going to be angry and be more concerned about the bourgeoisie or the landowners and the rentiers and landlords. That's how it is. It breeds more progressivism because they have to take away things that you owned and that you earned and worked to have. So, I mean,
well, and that's why they have to define this as fascist, right? Because
absolutely.
Because any opposition, anything that could stop the inevitable march of communism has to be fascism. Those are the only two forces that exist in history. And so, they automatically slap anything that's gonna stop the inevitable march of communism with that label. So yeah, he doesn't want people to be communists. The only other option is to be a fascist. There's simply no other option. The reason Target has become the locus of today's particular right-wing backlash is the same reason countless viral TikToks attempt to convince women that they're at risk of being kidnapped every time they're in a parking lot. Well, good news, guys. Things are very safe in cities. You don't need to worry about them. People certainly do not go to jail for attempting to defend themselves on the subway. No one gets pushed in front of subway cars. No one gets stabbed. That's just not. Those aren't real things that happen in cities in America. So you're fine. Just all women should walk alone in the dark at night in unsafe areas. They're just fine. It's all right wing propaganda. Yeah, that's what we're getting here. It's the reason why true crime is one of the most popular podcast genres in America, and why many refuse to travel with a gun by their side and shoot people if they set foot in their driveway. Protect
You know.
yourself. Don't walk into random people's property unannounced.
Yeah, don't do anything to say it's a prank or you're on for a TikTok video. True crime is I mean there's a whole other that's a whole
that's a whole
we don't have time to
break
answer for. But yeah, there's a reason for it. And it has a lot more to do with the particular audience of those podcasts than you think. But yeah, it's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, like I said, we just don't have time to get into that. That's its own 2-hour episode. All right. Hate against trans people is rising, but the suburbs are what give it its fervor and popularity. A million Torringtons, a million of these same locations in different locations. Okay. In which any difference or anything out of place or spontaneous is perceived as a threat.
People like being left alone. What a surprise.
Well, so it's really interesting here. They're going to argue, the argument here is that suburbs are kind of are forcing uniformity here, right? That's kind of what they're trying to say, is that suburbs force uniformity, and that therefore, like, they have a violent reaction to anything that's out of place or spontaneous. But of course, this is exactly the reaction we get from over-socialized leftists in major metropolitan areas who lose their absolute mind the minute that anyone steps out of line in their company, tells an off-color joke, has any opinion outside of kind of their entirely pre-approved thing. This level of uniformity exists in a high degree inside pretty much every leftist institution, and they're the ones that have a absolute fit anytime anyone kind of steps on the line to these things. But they're trying to make the suburbs the place where any of this kind of freedom would happen. Though, in my experience, suburbs are the place where your kids can play outside. Suburbs are the places where you can suddenly start a cookout with, people. Hey, I'm cooking some burgers. Come on by. People just walk down your road. All of a sudden, a bunch of people are all sitting around, lighting off fireworks, talking to each other. It's the place where like natural organic community happens. Those are the places where you have more spontaneity, not these places that are completely micromanaged by progressive leftist commissars.
Well, I think that you can actually reduce that down one step further. What that really is that he's complaining that there's homogeneity. There's homogeneity in the cities because there's a dominant liberal mindset. There's a homogeneity in liberal institutions because everyone has to agree to the same things and prostrate themselves before the same shibboleths and icons of people that they, may or may not agree with, but because they're leftists, they have to. I mean, it's the same thing with the suburbs. Like, everyone is out there to either not deal with the city, to escape the cost of living. They're probably wanting to keep their families and neighborhoods safe. There's spontaneity. There's high trust.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you have this relative homogeneity both on either ideological or racial lines. And so, the city seeing these people as a perceived threat because we all share the same country. I can live in the suburbs and, say like out in the Catskills or whatever, right? And I still have to be beholden to the politics in New York City. And so, yeah, I may have a homogenous little suburban neighborhood outside of Manhattan or whatever, but it doesn't matter because Manhattan also has a homogenous liberal mindset and they see me as a threat. And this is what we're seeing time and time again is a mix of the sort of friend enemy distinction at play here, but also, well, what's the middle class? It's the suburbanites. It's the people that can afford to maybe not live in the city, but can't afford to live in the country because they have their jobs tied to the city. And so that high-low versus middle is coming to play again. And those evil, evil fascists are the guys in the middle and in suburbs flipping their burgers, wanting their kids to not get transed.
First you want to grill, next you have a funny mustache in your painting. Those are the steps. All right. No one on the stream has a mustache. I want to be clear. Wasn't. All right. It is of course true that these mass hysterias are part of an organized right-wing movement that is attacking human rights across the country through legislation banning abortion, gender affirmation care, and books making it illegal for educators to teach American history accurately. So this is a neat little package here, right? First, obviously, the left is furious that anyone on the right figures out how this works. The left organizes all of its activist movements. It has massive networks of NGOs. It makes all of this stuff happen. The things that we often think of as completely bottom up, grassroots movements are engineered by the left very specifically. And some on the right have started to figure out that actually this is why the left wins constantly, and maybe we should do some of this. Now, to be clear, the left has been pushing very particularly on the trans issue, and this has caused I think, pretty organic right-wing backlash, one that is actually grassroots to some extent. But for once, guys like Chris Rufo and Matt Walsh and other people realized, like, hey, we got this popular energy. What if we did something with it? We're like, what if we instead of just complaining about how the left has gone crazy and it's all hypocrisy, what if we went out there and we secured a policy change? What if we got out there and we took a corporate scalp for doing this stuff? Like, what if we did something that made people stop and say, oh, like we can win something here, and people will change their behavior based on like what we do. And so now that the left has figured this out, or rather, now that some parts of the right have figured this out, the left is terrified, right? All of a sudden, there are no right-wing organic movements, right? They're all completely led. And to be fair, this is both sides play this, right? Anytime it's my politics, it's the politics of the people, it's the popular position. Anytime it's your politics, it's the politics of a small minority of people who are radical and manipulating things behind the scenes. When the truth is, all politics is operated by elites. All politics that's going to long-term hold success is driven by small groups who are organized, the organized minority. And so on either side, if you want to win, you have to do this stuff. And of course, they tie it to like all of their other issues. Every one of these things is connected. So if if you ever cared at any point, if you're a woman who's big on like abortion rights, or if you're someone who was worried about like, I guess, education about American history, then you have to feel exactly the same way about trans rights. It all has to be one inseparable thing, so that the political coalition is basically one giant suicide pact based around this new minority that is pushing more and more extreme things onto the American population.
Yep, but I mean, there's a nugget of truth into that, because it's the small organized minority that gets things done. And again, like you see this on the right as well. Like once there's beginning inklings of organization, you do get the usual gatekeepers telling you that this is a bad thing, that we shouldn't wield power. But the same people that tell you that we shouldn't wield power are totally okay with you getting, dealing with crime and the ongoing, eunuch cult that we're dealing with when it comes to like transgender kids. So I mean, really what this illustrates to me is that, oh man, these people are learning how the game gets played. I mean, better late than never, but it does illustrate that this is the kind of battle we're in, is who can organize, who can fund, and who can, bring bodies to protests and things like that. And those things have a tendency to escalate. And this is what this article is all about, is, we got to eradicate the suburbanites.
I love the new guy on the block, the new Republican on the block, or who's really kind of a very old Republican, I guess, but the guy who's like, I can't believe that there are right wingers who want to use government power to stop their enemies. I can't believe there are right wingers talking about using the government power. We have to have small government. Oh, okay. How much are we sending to Ukraine? Oh, as many trillions of dollars as they want. Absolutely, every single one. Tax bleed everybody dry until we have every last dollar we need to throw at a foreign country through our arms manufacturers. Like, it's the same guy, within 10 seconds of each other. Exact, just that's the logic. It's beautiful.
What's the meme? Like, we should fund our police officers or actually enforce our laws. And it's like, shut up. And it's like, we should send more money to Ukraine. It's like, yes, sir. Glory to Raytheon. Right. It's the same thing time and time again.
Exactly. But the shape this movement has taken is not coincidental. It is in fact the product of a unique shape of unique shape of public life in America, or lack thereof. Suburbanites do not have town squares in which they protest. See, that's the main function of town squares. Protest, right? Not getting together, not celebrating traditional ceremonies or religious ceremony. holidays, not binding. The thing that binds the leftists together is protest. It's the destruction of civilization is the key for any town square. So because you don't have town squares in Suburbia, they can't do the sacred ritual protest. They don't have streets to march down. Again, what's the purpose of a street? Only revolution. Turns out the purpose of every social institution is revolution. Target has become the closest thing many have to a public forum.
I mean, it kind of reminds me of what like Thomas Marcus writes in Buildings and Power about like city architecture in comparison to say like Suburbia, wherein if you're concerned about controlling people or organizing power, you want your architecture to have like a town square or a city hall or a wide open walkable space where there can be bodies to protest and have a central point where they can all flood into. The suburbs don't really have that. I mean, you might have a city hall or like the school board or whatever, but again, if you're in a place where there aren't a lot of walkable areas, then what do we see? Well, we see the same thing during 2020 with Black Lives Matter protesters. They'll just lay down in front of the highway so you can't go home from your job back to the suburbs because that's where they recognize that that's their only avenue to block things is with regards to city planning, zoning, and architecture. And so, yeah, I mean, it's all about protest to them because their only sacral, their only sacred thing to them is the protest. Everything else has been desacralized.
Well, you have to do the Napoleon thing where you make the streets wide enough for a division to march through. Like all of them have to be standardized there.
Anyway. Well, the obesity crisis, I think, has that settled.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, current U.S. troops not going to clear that French street.
Yeah.
We often hear that urban areas are more liberal and suburban ones more conservative. And we're often told that this is because of race. This may be partially true, though cities are wider than ever and suburbs more diverse than ever. Interesting. Is that a problem for them? I'm trying to understand. Anyway, instead, it may be that suburbanism itself is an ideology, breeds reactionary thinking, and turns Americans into people constantly scared of a big bad other. So it's kind of funny here. They're actually like, well, there's like maybe politics isn't entirely based on race, which is kind of from their position is a very funny thing to kind of
I have to chuckle because that last sentence is one of those like woke is more correct than the mainstream type bits here. Because why do people escape to cities? Because the leftist policies typically run them into the ground. And so of course, suburbanism is going to breed a reactionary thinking. It's a high trust society. People go to the suburbs because they can rely on their police to deal with crazy people. Heaven forbid, we actually like having safety and security and a relative sense of homogeneity. But,
Yeah, if someone decides to be inside my house, I have a sheriff that says I'm allowed to protect myself. What a terrible thing. Can't wait for the city to come and ruin that ability.
But I wonder if their commentary about more diverse than ever has to tie into that like lovely multiracial whiteness that they've been going on about since 2020.
Point. Yeah. You've got the rise of the Hispanic white nationalist. You've got to worry about that. You can't. If they move to the suburbs, then they're just going to go right down the pipeline, right?
Yeah, they'll just keep bleaching themselves. It doesn't matter what Martinez has to say. He's a Nazi now.
Blue-eyed Gonzalez is as far as the eye can see. All right. The suburban doctrine dictates that public space be limited and conflict free where it exists. I mean, yeah, more conflict, man. Let's get as much conflict as we can into our areas. That's a goal of civilization. We wouldn't want a place that's conflict free. That would be a terrible thing. No one would want to live there. That private space serves only as a place of commodity exchange. That surveillance, hyper individualism, and constant vigilance are good and normal and keep people safe. Again, you're going to get way more surveillance, or at least as much surveillance in a city. So a lot of this stuff can just be directly ported over, to leftist urban environments. You're certainly getting a lot of hyper individualization in those areas. It's not like people have deep roots in a lot of these cities that they're desperately fleeing because they've become incredibly dirty and unsafe.
I mean, people don't have deep roots in suburbs either. I mean, like they're incredibly deracinating. Like, oh, where are you from? Like, oh, I'm in this cookie cutter suburb that I like. It's almost as if everyone kind of forgets the like progressive lefty like musical counterculture of like Bowling for Soup or Green Day complaining about how crappy the suburbs are because there's no place to really exist or to be me. But I mean, like in this age of digital communication, right? Like we've achieved this great fragmentation of identity. Like Marshall McLuhan was talking about this like back in the like 50s or 60s with the Gutenberg Galaxy. He was just like, look, the television visual medium will die, and we will have this electronic interdependence to where now we live in this like global homogenizing village where it doesn't matter that someone like me who lives out in the country where kids can like literally ride their horses to like go to the local park or to go to high school, if they're still speaking in the same sort of like Zoomer TikTok, gesticulation type of language. And so, I mean, cities and suburbs have become really hyper individualistic, but they've also been like really flattened, sort of like Kierkegaard's concept of the leveling. There is no more unique identities. It's all sort of the same homogenizing force. But in the suburbs, the homogenizing force is that, well, we have some sort of desire to not be like them, the city, the area of crime, the area in which there has been this atomization of private property, of law and order, and that if I do something that 20 years ago would have been seen as something worth applauding and getting the key to the city, now it gets you arrested by a progressive district attorney whose campaign was funded by like the Soroses. Like this is where we're at now. And so for them on the suburban side or the progressive side or urban side and the progressives, all that you're seeing now is that, well, these guys aren't like us. And that's clearly a problem because we have to homogenize them into this progressive anarcho-tyrannical state where if you speak up, that's the case. And I'm surprised that they haven't leaned too much into the racial element by that for reasons I really don't know as to why this article doesn't. But I mean, consider the fact that, white guy Daniel Perry or Penny, the gentleman from New York City who, try to take care of a crazy person in a chokehold who unfortunately passed away. And I don't think it was related to the chokehold, but with drugs. And now all of a sudden, he's arrested for doing something that was in his home. He's from that area. He wasn't some stranger, but they have to treat him as one because he was white and because he did something that 20 years ago would have been seen normal.
Would have been heroic.
Yeah, would have been heroic. I mean, he's a hero. I don't care what people say. He's a hero.
Get that guy a steak dinner, right? Like that. Yeah. That would have been the response. Same thing with the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
This slightly different dynamics there, but again, you're absolutely right. He is in front of a prosecutor because of the race of the guy who died. That's all there is to it. And it's not just though it certainly falls more because he's white. There was the other, I'm trying to remember, there was another guy who like shot an armed robber who was trying to do his, take stuff in his bodega. And he, even though it was completely and obviously self-defense, he ended up on trial for murder. And he was like Lebanese or something, he wasn't white guy at all. So it's very clear that, like you said, this anarcho tyranny is something that is just heavily desired. It's incredibly racially motivated, and it makes it impossible for people to live in those societies. And then as soon as they try to escape anywhere else, then they're just agents of fascism. So
yeah, and I mean that's the really big divide here. I'm glad that you kind of chimed in there because I think it helps trying to get to where I was going because in a large urban area where it's more concentrated, it's more progressive. Anarcho-tyranny works because there's not a large enough collective for people to say no or to protest. Whereas in the suburbs, there are enough people that share your opinions that if you were to defend yourself and you were to say, take the life of someone trying to rob you, you probably have more than enough people that have your back. And even then, it's not a guarantee nowadays, as we've seen in the past, because again, the internet makes it accessible for anyone to see. So it doesn't matter if you live out in the middle of nowhere like I do. Like if I were unfortunately in a self-defense situation, not to rip off Sam Hyde there, but like, and I had to take the life of somebody who was trying to rob me and he happened to be black. It doesn't matter. There's an army of urban leftists that are ready to come invade my little country estate to make sure that I'm properly prosecuted or something like that. That's the nature of this kind of conflict. It really has been, as this article's author has correctly identified, it's existential for them because apparently we're fascists.
Well, and it's funny because of course they're complaining about the organization of the right. Oh, they're artificially producing this stuff. They're top-down manipulations of creating these movements. But of course, the thing you're talking about, the phenomenon you're talking about there, is exactly one created by the left from the top down to bus large armies of protesters into small suburban areas if there's any kind of shooting they can exploit. Kenosha, Wisconsin probably wasn't the most the most crazy urban environment. So even if you do manage to get yourself outside of these areas, yeah, like you said, you're just in a situation where the left will bring the problem to you. And so again, the point is to always eliminate any area of safety. You're never allowed to have any of this stuff. You're never allowed to be anything but lockstep with the progressive movement. And any attempt to move outside of it or escape it, you will be chased down. There's the side that wants to win is going to beat the people who want to be left alone.
Yeah, and I want the audience at home to think about that and then consider immigration. It's the same thing.
It's an ideology that extends beyond the suburbs. It affects everything. Even cities, as Sarah Schulman writes in The Gentrification of the Mind, have become places where people expect convenience and calmness over culture and community. What is a life of living in a surveilled and amenity-filled high-rise and ordering all of your food and objects from the internet to your door, if not a suburban life? So yeah, we can just kind of reverse engineer our argument here, right? The problem is that our cities are too much like suburbs. It's not that our ruling affluent class created a bunch of problems so that they could obtain more power and then use their affluence to completely block off any of the consequences of those decisions. We have to completely decouple any kind of consequences. The only thing they're trying to evolve is culture and community. What does culture and community mean in this sentence? It means the escape of from what? It feels like they're trying to tell on themselves really hard here.
Oh, I mean, what is every leftist fluff piece other than a projected confessional about what they want to do to other people?
Very true. You're not wrong. To make matters worse, the people who have adopted this mindset don't see it as an ideology, but as the normal right state of the world. There, as Schumann writes, look in the mirror and think it's a window. So when anything, even a gay T-shirt, disrupts their view, they become scared. Yes, that's all that's happened. Someone has a T-shirt that's gay. That's the only thing that's happening in society right now. That's exactly right. I'm sure. Anti-trans panic at the center of the Target controversy. Let's remember again, as Prude rightly pointed out, the timeline. Let's give a little bit of context to these events, because we seem to hate context right now. Remember what led to this. Okay, why are we here? Parents have been targeted by the FBI if they disagree with their children being forced to be groomed by American educational institutions. If they don't want radical gender ideology forced onto their children, they are threatened by state security apparatus. We had a guy who was protesting the aggressive rape of his child, his daughter, in a school bathroom, arrested just because he disagreed with the school board. He was pulled out and arrested for this reason. Then we had a shooter in Nashville and following trans ideology kill 6 people, 3 of them children, at a Christian school. And right after that, immediately after that, it was not, we feel a lot of remorse for the Christian community. We feel really bad for the people who went to this school. We're going to do a lot of donations for these people. Instead, every single institution, from the federal government, Joe Biden, the White House, down to these corporations, down to celebrities like Madonna, said, we're on the side of the trans shooter. We're on the side, we stand with that community, not the one that was attacked, that was murdered. We don't stand with the murdered children. We stand with the other community. This is what actually started the boycott thing, at least to some extent. Like this is the context in which then these really aggressive pride celebrations became offensive, because this person had murdered 6 people, had murdered children, had murdered Christians, and everyone sided with the cause of the shooter. On top of that, there was another trans shooter who was stopped. Again, we don't talk about this anymore, that this person just disappeared from the news. There was another one that was stopped that was planning to target a middle school and multiple churches. So we very well could have had dozens of dead children or Christians across the nation from this ideology. When we had the Target incident, after the protests, where are the threats coming from? The bomb threats towards these targets, all the news agencies shifted the headline to try to make it look like these were just coming from people who oppose the Pride Month or whatever, who are for the Target boycott, but they weren't. These threats were explicitly from people who said Target backed down to these bigots. Target betrayed the LGBTQ community. They're the ones pushing violence. So to be really clear, at every step of the way of this, the violence, the direct terrorism, the direct acts of state persecution have come from the left, have come under the justification of advancing radical gender ideology, trans ideology, especially when it comes to children. But when we get the sentence here, the anti-trans panic, as it's something completely manufactured, it came out of nowhere, has no connection to reality. Remember, look at the context, guys. Think about the chronology. These things happen. These events are connected. They mean something. And the goal of pieces like this is to pretend it's all just ridiculous. It's all just a hysteria. And actually, not only is that, it's artificially manufactured by evil fascists, these kulaks living in their suburbs. They're eventually going to go out and just like slaughter all these trans people. And so like, we've got to get rid of them first. Like, that's very clearly the tone of this piece. It's very clearly what they're trying to say. If we don't eradicate these people's way of life, then they're going to get rid of us. And so we've got to get rid of them. And that's why when they say things like the anti-trans panic here, they don't give any context to what actually happened. Because if they did, you might realize like actually all the violence is coming from a particular side, and there's a connection there.
Absolutely. And I think that, we talk about chronology, and I think that it's important to kind of contextualize that, we're less than 10 years out from Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015. And from, love is love, which of course isn't. Here we are now where, LGBT crowds and lobbies are threatening to bomb Targets and other convenience stores that kowtow to regular people, not diehard right-wingers, not people that are, shaving their mustache a certain way, individuals that don't want their children to be exposed to deranged satanic artists. And again, it's the Target thing. The creator behind those is a literal Satanist, who has shirts and things that say, Satan respects your pronouns. Believe it or not, Satan does respect your pronouns, so he can get you into hell. But outside of just the religious aspect of this too, pull that thread a little, go back even further in time. You've got, individuals like Harry Hay, that NAMBLA walks with him at gay pride parades, a national pederistic association, that's what he walks with. And they can't help but tell on themselves when it comes to this, because, when they do have those choirs saying that we're coming after your kids, it's the same thing that they were saying 50 and 60 years ago when these movements were just starting. And when people say no to it, and you can't proselytize it, you can't abuse or expose these children to it, you're absolutely right. It is existential for these sort of groups, because when you say no to it and you stop proselytizing it, people have a tendency to not believe it. Just a month and a half ago, Auron and myself and Logan Clark Hall from New Founding, had an episode together, and we were talking about how 1 in 5 Gen Z Americans identify as some kind of LGBT identity. It doesn't matter if they actually practice those acts or not. The identity is what matters to them. They have to enculturate these people to assume that it's acceptable. If you can have that sort of cultivation going on within the young, it's the same thing that every Leninist, every Marxist, every socialist has ever said. Give me a generation of kids, and they will turn you into the gulags, within just 15 to 20 years. And this is what we have now. I mean, we already saw this with other political issues, whether it be parents reporting or children reporting on their parents for attending an electoral justice protest on January 6th, 2021. The same thing will happen now. You don't want your children to be on, testosterone or HRT or to get a double mastectomy or whatever. Well, you'll see states like California propose some sort of quote unquote underground railroad Because for the left, the cultural mythology is the solid march of a never-ending revolution until everyone is atomized, everyone can't breed. What's that C.S. Lewis line? We castrate the geldings and then bid them to be fruitful. This is what it is. And the only way that this sort of leftist ideology can be fruitful is if it is in every aspect of the public space 24/7. I mean, Glenn Youngkin only got elected because he started focusing on the cultural issues of what happened in that school in Loudoun County, Virginia, where that child was assaulted by a trans person or a trans student, which just happens to be a boy assaulting girls. And so, again, what this article is doing is illustrating that there is a state of emergency for this particular political bent. And when there's a state of emergency, powers that be will decide a state of exception. And that's when you start targeting people that you disagree with. And this sort of targeting has been going on for a very long time. You have the legal superstructure for it, as we saw with the Bostock County case in 2020, where actually, yes, transgender discrimination isn't valid, and it is illegal under the Civil Rights Act and its preceding amendments. You do live under a legal superstructure that if there are protected groups, there is little to nothing that you can do about it. And right now, what people still can do is try and move away and vote with their wallet and ask these brands to not put it on there. And by even simply asking, hey, Target, I don't want this crap for my kids, that's considered to be an existential genocidal crisis for them. Ergo, you're a fascist. We must have a never again sort of rhetoric, and we have to target you. It's simple as that.
It really is amazing, when Paul Gottfried explains that basically the American regime is just one of denazification. How true.
Please read Anti-Fascism Course for Crusade by Paul Gottfried, because it really does explain this in much better detail than I just gave in a 30-second rant.
Though you did give excellent detail, but yeah, it is amazing how well that argument kind of holds together, and how prescient it has been when we kind of saw everyone transition from everyone who disagrees with left is racist to everyone is actually a fascist, and all of a sudden it turns out that you need to eliminate the places where fascists live, because that's certainly not rhetoric that's ever gone wrong ever in history.
No.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to move over to the questions of the people. But before we do that, Mr. Prudentialist, is there anything people should know about? Where can they find your excellent work?
Oh, absolutely. Well, once again, Auron, thank you for having me on. Always enjoy speaking with you, and as well as with your lovely audience. You can find me on YouTube, Twitter, and all sorts of great places as the Prudentialist. Will be live later this evening. I host a wonderful little podcast called The Digital Archipelago. We will be talking about the late, great Cormac McCarthy later today at 7 p.m. Eastern. But I cover culture, politics, and international relations. And Auron and I will be later this month, next week, actually. Tickets are still available, speaking at the Sildings event conference. So you can buy your tickets there at sildings.com/events. And that's who I am and what I do.
Excellent, guys. Of course, make sure that you check out everything with the Prudentialists. I will be certainly listening into that Cormac McCarthy stream. Read The Road and Blood Meridian and No Country for Old Men here in the last 2 years or so. Really enjoyed those. Can't really speak highly enough of those. But all right, let's move over to our questions here real quick. General Grievance here for $5. Can't watch live, but still want to support. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Is there any time frame on the Benevolent Dictator stream with that history whiz you were talking about? So Furious Pertnex is who you're talking about. We did the stream on Caesarism. It won't so much be a stream on benevolent dictatorship, but really on the nature of dictatorships in general. Sometimes they can be benevolent. Sometimes they can be not, they can be horrific. But what we want to do is kind of unpack the concept of dictatorship and remove it from just kind of the lazy application it gets today. It is an office that actually existed with the Romans. It was an official political office. And it's something that they kind of, we can go into in depth. I'm rereading Carl Schmitt's book on dictatorship to kind of prepare for that. So I'm not sure when that'll happen, but it definitely will happen. I think it's a very interesting topic to kind of help us historically and politically understand the functions that dictators have taken on from time to time, what it meant historically, and why kind of the general lazy application today doesn't quite hold.
Great username, by the way.
That is, yes, absolutely. Florida Henry here for $5. I grew up on a farm and now live in a walkable city. Suburbs feel like the Twilight Zone. just dead inside. Yeah, and like I said, there are reasonable critiques of the suburban construction. There are real things where you can kind of point to, like, okay, this isn't healthy parts of suburbs. At the end, they really are part of atomization. They were a step in atomization. They do disrupt kind of natural parts of human life. Those are all reasonable critiques. Some of them have, they're difficult to uh, uh, kind of work out when it comes to like how you get certain amounts of people living in a certain area, or how you actually plan to deliver certain services. But those are fair points. That's kind of why I preface this article with, you can make certain critiques of suburbs that are genuine and reasonable, but in this case, they're just going directly with, this is all because people, it's all because people want to destroy trans people. That's the only reason that suburbs exist. And so that's kind of the level at which we were looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, there's, like I mentioned earlier in today's conversation, like there's a lot of critiques that you can levy against suburban life. There's a lot of deracinating aspects to it. The culture or your roots are artificially laid down, a lot like fake grass and sod. But for this instance, like Auron just said, right, like this is really about the fact that people who don't live in the city, who tend to have conservative opinions, when you don't live in, say, like New York or whatever, they oppose this stuff. Ergo, we have to destroy the places they live. We have to have our march through the suburbs, like General Sherman did to the sea.
Yeah, they're not wrong. Like, as Prudentialist pointed out, that the suburbs prevent communism, and just like the kulaks are a problem, right? A class that owns a little too much to be entirely dependent on the system, a class that owns a little too much to be able to create some level of independence and do its own thing, and not have to completely fall in lockstep with that's a problem if we're going to have a completely kind of communistic, overbearing, centralized government. And so they just like the kulaks need to be liquidated, so do the suburbans need to go. Doesn't mean everything about the suburbs is amazing in and of itself, but it definitely is a politically motivated need to kind of eliminate the kulaks as a class, there. Yeah. Creeper Weirdo here for $2. Mussolini lived in a suburb. Coincidence?
Well, don't give them any more ammo.
Yeah, Hitler could breathe in air. Coincidence? Yes.
Remember, drinking water makes you a fascist.
Mostly hates, hate food. Do you like dogs? Hitler liked dogs. You must also be. Yes. No, you're right, Creeper Weirdo. That is the level of argument that we are getting here in many ways. Thank you for your donations there. Machiavelli
sucks to go.
Oh, together. Okay, very good. Federal Reserve is a debt-based scam. The government should issue currency, not bombs. Or bonds.
They issue plenty of bombs.
That's how they get to issue the currency. But yeah, no. Hear what you're saying, man. Yeah, no. Many people holding very similar opinion. Cripper Weirdo here for $5. I'm no capitalist. All my toys have commie symbols on them. Yes, all the things mass produced by the capitalists have Che Guevara on them. Therefore, I am a communist.
Yeah, what do you mean? I love my Funko Pops and my freshly unfolded transgender flag that I just purchased off Amazon.
Tell me that there's a Karl Marx Funko Pop.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure there is somewhere. If not, someone's got a 3D print that they can spend the money to purchase it for. But yeah, I mean, the left has they're more entrenched with capital than we are in that respect. And it kind of puts us in a weird political era of realignment, but that's where we're at.
The left is a political human centipede. Again, Creeper.
Oh, so true. So true. So true.
Let's see. Dylan was just annoying and lame. Nashville was an actual attack. More right wingers need to talk about that. Yeah, I mean, so this was initially my concern. I made this video about like how you could win this stuff, right? And I said, if you're gonna fight this, then here's what you should do. Make sure your friends are hired, your enemies are fired. That they give money to your patronage network, blah blah blah. But kind of during that video, I said, like, this is kind of sad that this is the only way that people feel like they can kind of push back. And because this is the way that people have chosen to push back, it's become more about Bud Light than it is about this shooting. That was a very real and violent and horrific thing that made children its victims, that made Christian its victims, that was perpetrated kind of along what would seem like ideological lines. We still don't have access to that manifesto, surprise, surprise. So that should have been the focus, but it wasn't. That said, you got to take your W's where you can. And I think it is clear that the Bud Light boycotts were a win, at least to some extent. That they, the Target ones that followed also had a noticeable impact. They're not complete victories in and of themselves because they don't actually secure you power. And what you should be doing with these popular energies is securing power, which is why they're angry when guys, again, like Chris Rufo or maybe Matt Walsh or somebody, use that popular power to more effective ends, because the left definitely doesn't want to see that. They definitely don't want the right to learn that actually just having the silent majority on your side doesn't do anything. And what you really need is to capture popular political will in a way that creates lasting change in elite institutions. And so, it would have been best if all of this had been done in the name of slaughtered people, right? Like that would have been the correct way to be able to do this. But the fact that the Bud Light thing stuck, and the fact that it's a victory, and the fact that it might be leveraged to do something that matters, at the end of the day, you just, everything's not, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here, I guess is what I'm saying.
I mean, I agree with that, and I share your very similar concerns. I mean, the whole thing is also being relitigated because the autopsy report just came out, and they're calling the mortician, or the guy that does the autopsy, they called him transphobic for using a female body on the sketch for all the entry wounds and where they were shot and all that was. And so, I mean, it's indicative of the fact that that stuff is, I think, way more important. I mean, 6 people died. But you also have to hit them where it hurts, which is their wallets. And I mean, we've gone to war over less in terms of people getting killed. And so I know where you're coming from, Creeper Weirdo. I share your sentiment, but at the same time, I think that perhaps what could be done is, every time that you boycott, or every time that you hide or let these things go away, you're doing it in their memory, and we should make sure that their memory is commemorated.
All right. Laws and Lycurgus for $5. Very nice. When liberalism is about becoming apolitical, so merchants and nobles can get rich, and we can only discuss 12 topics that are meant to last 70 years. Yeah. So this is a reference to Schmitt's kind of concept of the political guys, if you're not familiar, and the fact that Schmitt's critique is that liberalism basically attempts to remove the friend enemy distinction. By the way, I did a video on the friend enemy distinction that was very short. Might need to do a longer one because a lot of people are throwing it around in ways that don't work, doesn't make sense. Might need to clarify that concept, but anyway, we can't do that right now. Point being, the idea with Schmitt is that liberalism kind of artificially tried to remove the political. And because so many things actually are existential, so many of our disagreements are existential, you had to kind of limit the discussion to a very small amount of topics over which you can argue. So there's a reason that both left and right constantly avoid very particular areas, because if you actually had and acknowledge kind of the existential opposition of certain value sets, certain ways of life, then you might actually have to come to illiberal conclusions about kind of how those ways of life could coexist. And so, liberalism is great for merchants, because they can make a lot more money. It's great for kind of getting your society to work together and enriching your ruling class, like you said, the nobles there. But it's not particularly good for kind of recognizing truths about the human condition that you can't escape once you kind of, just because you said, well, we're not going to have political anymore.
Yeah, you can't escape existential realities in the same way you can't escape biological ones. And I think our good friend Skeptical Waves has concept of the political available for audio on his channel. I would highly recommend that you listen to it. But yeah, many such cases where someone throws around friend-enemy distinction without actually reading Schmitt, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't want to. It's a complicated thing, but I don't want to say it's overcomplicated. I think it's graspable by most people. But the problem is, so many people, and I'm probably part of this because I throw memes around. So many people have understood it as a meme that they just kind of make it a shortcut to their explanation of things rather than understanding the actual point of the friend enemy distinction, which is there are certain things that once a group has been othered, then you can't really coexist, and this is how coalitions form, and this is the nature of political disagreements, and that means that certain political disagreements will always lead to particular ends. This is how the total state gets formed. Like those are all things that are inside the concept of the political. It's only like really 70 or 80 pages, so it's well worth your time if you want to get around to it.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, I think that's everything. Like I said, make sure that you check out all of the Prudentialist's really excellent work. I know he's got a stream coming up, so make sure that you're checking that out as well. And of course, if it's your first time here, make sure that you're subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure that you go and subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. When you do that, make sure to leave a rating and review. That really helps with the algorithm magic. Thanks for coming by, guys. And as always, we will talk to you next time.